Welcome everyone, welcome. I'm going to go make sure that this stream is coming accurately to you, so bear with me 1 second while I double check. It looks good. I can see that it's indicating live now. So wonderful. I'm going to make sure I mute this. All right, so we're up and running. I'm sorry I'm starting a little bit late. I had intended to start at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Here I'm in New York State, United States, New York State. And I had to change it. Over the summer I was doing 1 o'clock, and the semester has started for me. I'm back to teaching my college classes, and so to adjust my schedule to fit all my other obligations, I'm going to attempt to have this same live Q&A happening on Saturdays, but at 3 p.m. Eastern every other week. So every 2 weeks, I'm hoping to be able to continue as I'm teaching all my classes and performing, because I still really value and enjoy answering these questions and talking with you all. So before we get started, and I mentioned this last time, but I wanted to bring it up again. Sometimes I get some emails and some comments on the YouTube channel asking whether I can help out one-on-one. And as much as I would love to, help each one of you achieve your dreams, become better composers, pass that music theory class, get that entrance exam, I'm spread too thin to give everyone that one-on-one attention. So what I try to do is provide you with the videos. I try to answer some questions through the comments. But I've discovered a way that you can get some one-on-one. Unfortunately, when you're getting one-on-one, it just has to cost some amount of money. You have to kind of pay the people. I mentioned this last time. I am chair of the Dutchess Community College Academy of Music. And I recently spoke with some of the music theory instructors, and I asked them some critical questions. Number one, have you watched any of my YouTube videos? And the answer was yes. I actually have 2 people who are working for me through this Academy of Music. They've watched my videos. They have degrees in music, so they have academic credentials. They've taught music theory, and their teaching style, they understand my teaching style, and their teaching style is very sympathetic with what I do. So I feel very comfortable recommending to you, if you have, starting at $120, I'm sorry if this sounds like an ad, but I am trying to provide you with the service if it's good for you. And if it's not, keep watching these free videos and enjoy. But if you can, for $120, starting at $120, you can get 2 hours of one-on-one help with your music theory from people that I know what they're doing and can help you. So this is, and if you look online, if you just Google SUNY Dutchess Academy of Music, SUNYDUTCHESS.edu/Academy of Music. I'm going to try to put a link in the topics so that you have that. But if you're eager, because we have our lessons starting up in I think 2 weeks for the credit free. It's not college credit, but which is why we can offer such a great price. But for those of you who really need and really want that one-on-one touch, this is a great option, and I wanted to let you know all about it. All right, enough with the advertisement. I had a person who's been creating some exercise web pages to go along as a companion to my music theory videos. And I'm going to share the link in this description. It's going to take me, I've been so busy, I want to promise that it'll be there by tonight or even tomorrow. But eventually it'll be in there. And I think I've mentioned it previously. And it's mentioned on the Facebook page that one of my viewers has set up. So there's a Dr. B Music Theory Facebook fan page where people can post their questions, and some people on that Facebook page, they'll help each other out, which is exactly what we want. We want to have a community where if you have a question, you can post it on this Facebook page, and then somebody else can help you out and answer your question maybe a little bit faster than I'll be able to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post in the description of this video a link to these pages. Now, it's a work in progress, so there's a whole bunch of mistakes. Little mistakes. It's by and large excellent, but there's a few little mistakes I've caught already. So what I would like you all to do is if you look through those web pages and you're looking at those and you find a mistake, post the mistake in the Dr. B Facebook page, music theory page. That way I can correspond with him and we can fix it up and make it even more valuable of a resource. But I've seen the initial things and it's awesome. You can have a 4-part harmony example and you can just listen to the bass and soprano. It'll play it back through a MIDI sampling. You can listen to just the alto and tenor. So you can really isolate the different voice leading, really listen to it so you're connecting your ear to the music theory. He's done a fantastic job and he's done it for a whole bunch of my videos. So I think this is an extremely valuable resource for those of you really delving deep into understanding music theory at the most fundamental level. And so as we kind of look at it and proofread it together, we can kind of make it even more valuable for everyone. So again, I'm gonna post a link for that. It's already been posted once on the Facebook Dr. B Music Theory page. If there's anyone watching right now, so I see Danny Pippin is there. Hey, Danny Pippin, could you put a link in the chat to the Facebook fan page? That would be awesome. And that way we can kind of direct people there and we can direct those comments there. Absolutely. And it's funny. So Danny was just asking me to talk about enclosures. And it's so funny because the question I had prepared to answer has enclosures. So I was already planning to talk about it, and I can just go a little bit more in depth than I was originally intending, so that everyone can get what they want. But this question comes from another supporter of mine on Patreon who's getting ready for some of those ABSRM. I'm probably saying the abbreviation incorrectly. There are these exams over in the UK, and for like the Royal Academy of Music and things like that. And this is a grade 8 placement exam that he needs to study for. And so I've been answering these questions, and instead of just, what they do is they give you the question and they'll give you an answer, right? There's like an answer key. And that's great. That's a great place to start, but kind of figure out what is the step-by-step procedure to go from the question to coming up with a good answer. That's not always self-evident and obvious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a step-by-step process that you can use to answer this type of question. If you encounter it on a music theory test, on an entrance exam, or as a composer, because it's dealing with composition at its core. And so if you as a composer, these types of things, I've always said that you really want to cultivate musical inspiration, where you just hear this melody and you're like, that's it, and you start writing it out. Unfortunately, more often than not, you're gonna run out of inspiration before you finish that melody, before you finish that song, before you finish that symphony. And when that happens, that's when you need craftsmanship. That's when you need a step-by-step procedure that can help you complete that idea that you had, that inspirational idea, and bring it to a complete, fulfilled conclusion. So let's take a look at what we have today, and I'm going to be answering some questions in the chat, open questions, once I get done with this. I know that I've got a backlog. I've run out of time pretty much every time I do these YouTube Live Q&As. And I've been keeping track of them, and I do apologize that I haven't gotten to all of them, and sometimes they get bumped back. If I miss them, you're welcome to answer it again. I might put it on hold again, but I haven't forgotten you, and I do want to get to them. So let's start. Okay, and there's a lot of stuff up here on the board. So let me explain what we're going to be doing. So the question is, the challenge is, compose a complete melody. And we're starting with right here, we're going to be looking at this little segment of melody, okay? Compose a complete melody of not less than 12 bars using one of the following openings. I picked the one. And and for the given unaccompanied instrument. And so in this case, the instrument is an oboe. So I should write that down. And I neglected to write the tempo, which was allegro molto moderato. Molto moderato. And allegro means fast. This is Italian, and in music we typically use Italian words for tempo markings. So allegro means fast, moderato means medium, molto means very. So this is kind of a strange tempo marking. Fast, very moderate. So I'm thinking, you know, that's essentially meaning that it's going to have a somewhat fast feel, but pretty moderate. Pretty moderate. We're definitely not going to let this get away from us. So that's important in terms of establishing the character. The other designation they give you is they do give you the composer, which is Stanford. And they say that this is adapted from that. Okay, so it's an oboe part, and the task is for you to complete and write expand this into a whole 12 measures of melody. So there's a couple of things. So the question is like, where do you start? That's always one of the bigger challenges, right? So here I have a list, a checklist, a step-by-step list that I think will help you get to a good completed melody. Step 1, determine the key. So you're looking at this, you see two flats, either B flat major or G minor. Well, you see a natural, which you wouldn't necessarily expect in either, and you see an F sharp, which you definitely would expect in G minor. And so I'm looking at this, and when I first looked at this, I said, oh, maybe it's G minor. It ends here right on a G, got this F sharp. The more I thought about it, though, I said, this entrance, starting on a D, going up to an F natural. In minor keys, you don't often have such a big emphasis on the subtonic, the minor 7, especially right off the bat. So that made me think, well, maybe this is really B flat major, and it starts on the 3rd of a 1 chord and goes up to the 5th of the 1 chord. That would certainly be really typical. If it was minor, this would be, if this was major, this would be the 3rd going to the 5th of a 1 chord in B flat major. If it's in G minor, it's the 5 going to the subtonic. That's kind of unusual. So I thought about it, and I think that's really the crux of why I think B flat major. Let me write this also in another color so that we can separate everything. I think B flat major, for those reasons, is your best bet. It's the easiest. It's going to make the most sense. And you're not looking to, especially when you're answering an exam question or a placement exam, you're not looking to be super fancy. You're looking to show and illustrate that you understand the fundamentals of music. So if that were the case, I determined the key. I think this is B flat major. Then I need to determine, step 2, the harmonic rhythm. This is 6/8. 6/8 means it's a duple meter, a meter of 2. It's not six beats. This is a compound meter. 6 means 2 beats. So we got beat 1 here, beat 2 here, 1, 2. So my question is, are the chords going to be changing every beat or every measure? Or 2 beats would be another way to say it. And so let me play for you. And if you're in an exam, you want to kind of sing this to yourself. But I have access to a keyboard, so I'm going to play for you. And that's what we have as our initial opening. And you're going to need to sing this to yourself and imagine it in your mind and say, do you hear the chords going chord, da da da, chord, ba da da, chord, ba da da, chord? Or do you hear chord, ba da da da, be dee da, chord, ba da da dum? Something like that. And there might be more than one option there. So if we're going for 1 per measure, this would be 1 chord, 3rd, 2 passing tones, da da da, da, and then here's an enclosure right here. The C is not in the chord, the A is not in the chord, but it resolves to a note that we're definitely going to be putting in the chord. So the idea of an enclosure is that you have an upper neighbor jumping by a third to a lower neighbor and then resolving to a chord tone. And it's usually that upper, lower. It's not usually lower, upper chord tone, but that would technically still be an enclosure. It's more common to go upper, lower chord tone. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the enclosure in a minute, but I wanted to keep going and then say if we're going B flat, ba da da. So this might be another enclosure, right? So if B flat and G, you know, what chord has both a B flat and a G in it? That would be really common. I mean, one can go to anything, but how about a 4 chord? Let's keep it basic. 1, 4, 5 is our most basic chord progression, and 4 would fit perfectly right in there. So 1 to 4 would be a perfectly acceptable option. Now, if you did decide you wanted to get a little fancier and you wanted to have the chords changing more frequently, and let me play that for you so you can actually hear it. If it were 1, it would be something like this. That's 1 and 4. What if instead we started with the 1 to 3 to 4 to 2, 6? That would be another option. And I keep in mind the chart of good chord progressions. I'm going to put these in parentheses because those are optional. It's kind of like, you know, there's so many songs that you can just play with 1, 4, 5, 1, and you could pretty much play everything with 1, 4, 5, 1 because it does give you every note that's in a scale. But if you're looking to make things a little bit more colorful, a little bit more sophisticated, then you can say, oh, look, we could put a 3 in here, we could put a 2, 6 there. You can expand that. So you've then determined the harmonic rhythm, and you've indicated Roman numerals, which is step 3. This is all to make sure that, because whatever melody you compose, you might be saying, Dr. B, why are we talking about harmonies? It's to compose a melody. Just write the melody. Well, our melodies have to imply certain harmonic progressions. And you have to be very careful when you're writing your melody that the implied harmony fits in with everything else we've learned in music theory. Okay? So that's why we're doing this. After we've done that, we can move on to step 4. And step 4 is to analyze the motives. We want to understand the building blocks of this melody. So if I look at that, I'm going to say right here, this D, E flat, E natural, F. There we go. That's a little motive right there. And then the second one is this ba-da-da-dum. And it repeats, ba-da-da-dum. So this is motive A, this is motive B, and again, motive B. And we can analyze it, right? So motive A, D, has this 8th note pickup. It's tied to another 8th note, and then these 8th notes. When we're analyzing a motive, we're doing 2 things. We're looking at the rhythm and the melodic shape. So it goes 8th note tied to an 8th note, 2 more 8th notes in a row, ending on a longer sustained note. And in this case, it goes up chromatically, goes up the chromatic scale, and it connects the interval of a third. And this is going to be important. This interval is the interval of a third, and that's important, that emphasis. And we're going to talk more about that. So there's our primary motive. That's our first one. If we look at our second one, this ba-da-da-dum, da, step down, jump down a third, another third, and then back up to make it an enclosure. And it does the same thing here, ba-da-da-dum. So what do we notice here? We have an F sharp here. In the original, it goes whole step, minor third, up a half step. Here we have whole step, down a minor third, up a half step. Notice we add, the composer added that sharp there because they wanted that kind of leading tone effect underneath from the lower neighbor. And so we want to keep that in mind, that we're going, that these two steps are diatonic, right? I'm sorry, I misspoke. B flat A, that's a half step, versus D C, which is a whole step. So we know that the first step is diatonic. It's going to depend on our key signature. So D C, again, let me say it again since I misspoke a second ago, whole step, B flat A, half step. Diatonic, step down, then create a leading tone up. That's our second motive, or motive B as I'm calling it. So that's fundamental to what we're talking about. And this enclosure is a critical part of that motive. Enclosures, we talk about them, there's other ways to talk about them in some theory texts. Some theory texts will call it a neighbor group. Because the idea is that it's two neighbor tones, but instead of coming back to that neighbor, so you could say, well, if this is let's say A is your note, A, upper neighbor back to A, up to B flat back to A, that's a neighbor tone. You can also say, well, A down to G sharp, back to A, that's a lower neighbor. And what they're basically doing, actually I should have written this in the other order. Let me show you how it kind of originates. Here's your chord tone, the A. The B flat is an upper neighbor. You go back, resolve that neighbor tone. Go down to a lower neighbor, back up to the upper neighbor. So this would be upper neighbor, the B flat, lower neighbor, the G sharp. Now, the idea of a neighbor group is instead of going back in between, right? So we went A, B flat, A, G sharp, A. We just take out that A. And it's almost like a dangling neighbor group. You can take out that initial part and you can just have that ba-da-dum, da-da-dum, upper neighbor, lower neighbor, chord tone. And that's your resolution right there. So that's called a neighbor group. It's also called an enclosure. And the idea, again, is if you find a chord tone, whether it's the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh, you can create an enclosure around any one of those notes. And this is really common in jazz as well as other styles of music. So if I were to play a B flat major triad, I could go, that's an enclosure on the fifth. That's an enclosure on the third. That's an enclosure on the root. In each case, I take a diatonic upper neighbor and then a leading tone for the lower neighbor, whatever would create a leading tone, a temporary leading tone to my chord tone. So in this case, it's G, E natural, F, resolution, E flat, C sharp, D, C, A natural, B flat. Sometimes I'm going to need to use an accidental. So in the case of G, I have to put the E natural, B. I think we lost ourselves there for a little bit. All right, I think we're back. I think I saw that. If someone's in the chat and can let me know, yeah, something went wrong with the transmission. Yeah, I know. I just saw on my camera that it said unable to connect. All right, I'm back. Oh, thank you, Caleb. I appreciate that. Okay, awesome. Glad to hear it. If someone in the chat could tell me, was the audio going the whole time? And was it just the video that went out? Or did you lose everything for those moments? Because I don't know how long it was out. I got really nervous when I looked at my, oh, okay, it went all black. But was there audio going on? Well, no audio either. Okay, so what was the last thing that kind of came through? Because I don't know how long it was out. Lost about 5 minutes. Oh no, you lost all my talking about enclosures. I'm going to talk about the enclosures again. Because we were analyzing, we determined the key, we determined the harmonic rhythm, we indicated the Roman numerals, we then were analyzing the motives, and part of analyzing the motives was analyzing motive A right here, and then motive B. And I was pointing out that motive B has this enclosure. You'll have to take my word for it. It was a brilliant explanation of enclosures. I don't know if I can do it twice. It was like a one-time deal. I'm going to do my best. So what we have here is D, C, A, B flat. So our chord tone is that B flat. That's our kind of target note, our note of resolution. And we have the C and the A. So the upper neighbor and the lower neighbor. Now, what I want to point out is that the upper neighbor tends to always be diatonic, whatever's in the key. And the lower neighbor will sometimes be diatonic and sometimes be chromatic. And the reason is whatever is necessary for it to become a half step below that target note. So in this case, the A diatonically is a diatonic note below the B flat. In this second case of the second motive, we have the F sharp has to be, the F has to get sharp, so it's not diatonic. So A natural diatonic, F sharp chromatic. The idea is that both, though, create this half step resolution. So diatonic note, something that's a half step below your target note. And that's the idea, upper neighbor, lower neighbor. So if we were to take, for example, a B flat major triad, and we can listen to how that would work, you can do that for all the chord tones. So there's your B flat major triad. So that would be G, E natural, F. Upper neighbor, diatonic. Lower neighbor, we have to make it an E natural so that it's a half step for my resolution. And then E flat, C sharp, D, and that allows for the resolution to happen on the third of the chord. And then finally, C, A, B flat. Diatonic note, also diatonic, but still a half step below the resolution tone. So that's how enclosures work. They're really common in jazz. They're common in other styles of music as well. You can modify it, you can make it so that they're both chromatic, but this idea is the most common of them, where it's diatonic, upper neighbor, lower neighbor. And let me do one other thing that I think probably got lost when the stream died there for a second, is if we have our resolution note, and we have an upper neighbor tone, and we go back, so right, that's neighbor tone. And let's say we do a lower neighbor, and then we come back. The idea of a neighbor group, which is another name for an enclosure, is neighbor group, is that A, B flat, A, G sharp, A, just take out that middle A. You have the B flat, G sharp, the upper, the lower, and you just skip that note. And sometimes you'll have it like a dangling neighbor group where you won't even start with the resolution tone, you'll just end with it. So you can get a little bit more sophisticated in that way. So that's what's really unique and fundamental for this second motive in this melody. And again, like I said, we still haven't begun writing out the melody and really answering the question. We're still doing our step-by-step preparation so that when we get to that, everything flows, we don't get stuck. So we've analyzed our motives. Then the next step is to write out the motives. And so by writing out the motives, what I mean by that is it's to write them out starting on every note in the scale, in the diatonic scale. So this one started on the third, scale degree 3 of our key. I wrote it out here starting on scale degree 4. Now, it's going to be a little bit different. And this asterisk is to note exact transpositions. This is step 6. So this one goes all up chromatic because the distance between the third, scale degree 3, and 5 is a minor third. But here, the distance between scale degree 4 and 6 is a major third. So therefore, you can't use a chromatic scale. It won't come out right. So you start with the diatonic step, then you go chromatic to fill it in. So this is not an exact transposition, but this is how it would transform itself to keep within the diatonic key. The same is going to be true here. If we start on scale degree 5 of the key, we go up a step because, again, we're connecting the interval of a major third here. So we're not going to do the chromaticism thing that we had here for the minor third. So we go step, then the chromatic note, resolution. We always want you might say, well, why don't we have the chromatic note first? Why put it at the end? And the answer is that it helps the direction. The idea is that we have the step, and then the chromatic intensifies the tension, the dissonance, and then you have that half-step resolution like a leading tone. The idea of this leading tone is so critical in creating a forward motion, a goal-oriented direction to the music. It helps propel the music forward. So that's why the chromatic step happens there as opposed to between the F and the G. Here, when we start on scale degree 6, we're connecting a minor third. So it's just like an exact intervallic shape as our original, where we just go up chromatically. The same is going to be true when we start on scale degree 7. And then if we go over here, when we go starting on scale degree 1, here we're connecting a major third, so we go back to the other way where we go step up, then chromatic, chromatic. And then finally, when we start on scale degree 2, it's the same intervallic, it's the exact transposition of going up chromatically. So now what you have is you have motive A written out starting on any note in the scale. So if you find yourself composing the melody and you're stopping on a certain note and you say, well, you know, this would be a good spot for that motive A, but I need to start it on a different note. You have it right here and you just copy it into the music as you're going. That's why I'm recommending that you write out all the motives and transpose them. Not only to understand them better musically and conceptually, but then to have them that you can just slot them into the compositional melody. So if we then take the second motive and we just expand upon that, so we had D, we had it starting on D, we had it starting on B flat. If we say the B flat one, and then we just start going up by step. So instead of starting on scale degree 1, we start on scale degree 2 here. We need to have this be a diatonic step. Whatever's diatonic. It might be a whole step, it might be a half step. And then this note right here must be like a temporary leading tone to our target note. And again, the idea is we're connecting a third. This is B flat to G, that's a third. This C to A, that's a third. We're maintaining that intervallic relationship, and then we're just modifying the notes to fit that. So when we start on D, D, C, A natural, B flat, we don't need any accidentals because that A is a half step below. It's already a leading tone. We are set. No accidentals required to start on scale degree 3. And that's what you have right here. That's exactly what's given to us. So we know we're using the right principle because it matches up with what was given as part of the question. Here, if we start on scale degree 4, we step down diatonically. In this case, that happens to be a minor second. And then we leap down a third. And we make that a leading tone to our target note, a C. So we're connecting the E flat to the C. This connection, in this case, that is a minor third. In this case, it's a major third. So we recognize that in music, because of the way major scales are created, where you have half steps, a combination of half steps and whole steps creating that scale, that means that as we shift throughout the scale, the type of third, the type of second might change between major and minor. And that's to be expected, and that's kind of what keeps it so interesting, like it's fundamental. It's why whole tone scales are a little hard to really navigate, because you shift it, it's the same interval always with a whole tone scale. Same with a diminished scale. Because they're 100% symmetrical, you shift it up or down a step, the intervals stay exactly the same. Whereas a major scale, you shift it up and down, and sometimes the intervals change just by a half step here and there. And that creates a certain sense of variety and helps sustain the interest for things. I'm not dissing whole tone scales or diminished scales. They're awesome and you can do a lot of really cool things with them. But the exact transposition does change what you can do and how you do it. Here, if we're getting back to it, starting on scale degree 5, we then create that motive. Scale degree 6, here's what that motive would like. Scale degree 7, that's what that motive looks like. So we've now written out all the exact the transpositions of both motives. Now, it would be good to continue by putting in what could be possible harmonies, because as we're going and composing our melody, we have to keep harmonic progression in mind. So this could be a 4 chord right here, starting on this E flat, right? That could start on the root. In this case, it started on the 3rd, so maybe we should keep that as an option too, right? So we have, this is the 3rd of the thing. So if this is the 3rd, that means this is a 2 chord, right? And I could put in parentheses that this could be a 4 chord. 2 chord, this means it's the 3rd going up to the 5th. Or it could be the root going up to the 3rd. Those are going to be there's going to be 2 options when you have an interval of a 3rd, right? Because any triad has 1, 3, 5. So you're either connecting the root and the 3rd or the 5th and the 3rd. So there's 2 options when you have 1 chord that's implying it. Now if you decide you want to change chords between this chord and this chord, that opens greater possibilities. But we don't want so many possibilities we become overwhelmed. So we're just going to put the 2 possibilities. So if this is a 2 chord, then this would mean, and as we're going up, this would be a 3 chord because we're just going up. This would be a 4 chord. This would be a 5 chord. This would be a 6 chord. And this would be a 7 diminished 6. And I'm going to write 7 diminished 6 because we know 7 diminished triads are almost always found in first inversion. And we're not going to try to do anything unusual at this juncture. Then the ors, we know 4, this could be also 5. Or you could say also even 5-7, right? Let's not forget 5-7 as an option. Which would mean that the other option here would be 6, a 6 chord. In this case, the option would be a 7 diminished 6. And whenever we have 7 diminished 6, we could also say 5-7. And then moving here, we could say this would be 6. Let me just make sure I'm doing this correctly. I think I did something wrong. Did I do something wrong here? Oh, no, I did not. Okay. Or it could be a 1 chord. Again, I'm looking at the first motive in all these. I'm not looking at the second motive. And then this could be a 2 chord. And I just did that by saying, you know, I'm going up by step. So I don't even need to like go through all the analysis of what's the root, what's the 3rd, what's the 5th. I just know 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. I'm just going up by step. And I do that, and I'll do that all for the, you know, I can do that for all of the second motive as well. And so for the second motive, I might say that if we start with the C, that could be a 7 diminished 6. And I'm going to erase some things so that it doesn't get too confusing. So let me just take that out. Looks like our video stream is still working. It's the first time I've ever had the video stream conk out on me. So I do apologize about that, folks. I think we're back and running in business, so I'm happy about that. So if we have this idea of this connecting a 3rd to the root, this would be a 7 diminished 6 chord. 3rd to a root, this would be a 1 chord. This would be a 2 chord. This would be a 3 chord. This would be a 4 chord. And this would be a 5 chord. If the idea is that this is connecting the 5th to the 3rd, this would be a 5 chord. This would be a 6 chord. This would be a 7 diminished 6. This would be a 1 chord. This would be a 2 chord. This would be a 3 chord. All right? Luckily, again, I know that sometimes I go very quickly here, and you might need a little bit more time, and this is why it's archived up on my YouTube channel so that that you can go back and you can pause, write something out, play it on the piano, make sure you really understand what's going on. But this is what I would say would be, don't spend more time than this, because this is a lot of time. You might, if it's a timed exam, you might not have even enough time to do all of this. But at least do a couple permutations so that you really understand it. We've now done step 7. Last couple things to think about before we really start writing is that free counterpoint is kind of the answer to everything to connect motives. And by free counterpoint, this is a term often used in the Baroque era with the music of Bach, is that you have a motive, you might have a transposition, you might have an inversion of that, you might have a retrograde, and then you just have like some scales or some arpeggios. Scales and arpeggios are the most common thing in free counterpoint, and they tend to be more eighth notes or singing. So once we've done that, once you've gone to step 8 and you've remembered, I'm just basically remember this. Now it is time to compose. So let's take a look at what we have. So we were given this, and I didn't put in the slurs and the dynamics at this point. I want to keep it a little cleaner so it's a little easier to read. But we have this, and up through here, this is what's given. After that, everything you see after that is Dr. B composition. So what did I do after I rewrote what was given? I said, free counterpoint time to go up a scale. And I thought to myself, well, I know harmonically, I'm thinking of this as 1. I'm just keeping things real simple. 4. Well, what comes after 4? What would be good? How about a 5 chord? So I'm thinking I want to go for a 5 chord. I'm like, I can just go right up the scale and I can hit a note that's in the 5 chord. And you know what? I'm going to make it a 5/7 chord. And then I'm going to jump down to this E flat. And then I'm going to have this kind of this is going to be an appoggiatura. So, and I'm going to just going to keep it all. This is a passing tone, so passing tone, appoggiatura. This is all just a 5/7 chord, and I'm going to resolve to 1. So, when in doubt, use a scale. So I go from that G up to, and then I put in a leap for interest, occasional leaps for interest. And then a little rhythmic variety instead of just doing all 8th notes, because I could have gone. I could have made those all 8th notes, but you want to put in some rhythmic variety. And we have a dotted 8th note right here. So I said, maybe let's shift that dotted 8th note starting on another beat, another part of the beat, and we get some variety. So that's how I came up with that kind of cadential formula to end that melody. And I really like that like this little part here is like an inversion. It's like the upside down of this. Starting, right? So we got F, da, da, da. It's the exact same notes, just going down. So it gives it this kind of melodic cohesion, variety for interest, but similarity so that it sounds like it belongs together. So that's how I came up with it. And you'll notice that I'm writing things out in 4-measure phrases, 4-bar phrases. So because when the question asked for 12-bar minimum, I'm going to do the minimum. And because I know 4-measure phrases are the most common, that works perfectly. So I'm going to do 4 measures just like that, and I'm going to write it out that way so that I can see how everything lines up. Don't use 5 measures and then 3 measures. It just makes your life more confusing. It makes it harder for your brain and eyes to see the symmetry of the phrases that you're creating. So write it out in the 4-bar phrases. So there we go, a 4-bar phrase. Now after that, I'm gonna kind of keep the same idea. I want to use that motive again. So I take that motive A and I say, here it started on a 1 chord, but I'm right here on a D. What if I were to take a step up and do the same thing? So let me grab this little piece that I wrote out as kind of like my building blocks for my melody. I'm going to grab that piece, and I'm going to put it right over there, so that I then have a 4 chord, and I have a piece of that melody, and then I continue, and I do the same thing. I take that same little formula for motive B, and I keep it going. And how do I decide that I'm going to jump there? Well, I know that 4 chord often goes to a 2/6 chord, right? And I look and I say, well, you know, right here is my motive B with a 2 chord. I'm going to take that, I'm going to put that right over here. Actually, I should, that's right there. So that's right there. I'm taking those little motivic building blocks and I'm inserting them. And I'm using a harmonic progression to help me to figure out which one of these little pieces and at what key, at what pitch level, at what scale degree level is going to be the right choice. And so after I do that, I know here in the original, you had the hit and then it'll repeat the same note. And so if I do that and I have that new piece, and that piece is coming from, let me see where it is, right here. That's this piece. So this piece goes right to here. And then I know I'm going to change my harmonic rhythm up right. I know 2/6 likes to go to 5. So I'll hit here, and I'll do the same thing I did before. I'll walk up the scale. But now I'm at a different pitch level. I'm at 1 step higher. So I walk up that scale again, and you know, I know that 5 chord wants to go to 1, but I'm not ready for my cadence. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking 1/6. And then I say, you know, I've walked up the scale, and then let me do to cadence, let me do that motive B, starting on the E flat, which we had right here. So we repeat it again, and then we do this one that starts on D that was back here in the original. So I'm taking these 2 little pieces, I'm putting together, and then so this would be like a 5 chord here, because I'm hitting a C, and then I cadence here on 1, very clearly. Let me play for you what that sounds like. And I'm going to start with the very beginning that was given. Very clear, perfect, authentic cadence. Then, what am I going to do? Well, I started one phrase on 1, I started one phrase on 4. I'm going to do for like another kind of like, it's almost like a tag phrase. So it's like a 4-bar extension. So why don't I start on a 5 chord and just run up the scale? Because I'm writing for an oboe. I know woodwind players, they practice their scales all day, every day, right? They love to play scales. They love to show off their technique. So let's give this oboe player something fun to play that shows that they've practiced their scales. And it's exciting, not from a practical standpoint, that's what you want to make your performers happy. But from a musical standpoint, now you kind of have this completely different, I would not repeat it yet a 3rd time starting with that same motive A, because that would become too predictable. So do something that's different, that's variety. And free counterpoint, scales, like I said, when in doubt, scales. So that's exactly what I do. I take this, I make it a 5/7 chord actually. I run up to the 7th, then I put a leap. Remember how I put a leap here? You want to put leaps in for interest. And you'll say, but Dr. B, that's a leap of a tritone. That's an unacceptable melodic leap. And I'd say, when you're writing for a chorus, you're exactly correct. But this is instrumental music, and with instrumental music, it is common that you have those dissonant leaps. And in this case, those dissonant leaps are within the same chord. So it's not like the chord's changing, it's not between chords, it's within that 5/7 chord. And it has that wide leap. You know, in the original, there's this leap of a 6th up. Here, I did a leap of a 6th down, that was mine. Here, this is a leap of a tritone. So that big leap is something that was already established. So I run up the scale as part of my free counterpoint idea. I then have a leap for interest, I go back to it. I know 5/7 is going to go to 1. and I think to myself, you know, I want to keep the 16th note going. I'm here at this D. I can just do that same motive B starting on the E flat, ba da ya, and then actually I don't know if I sang it at the right pitch level. And then if I were to, when I first started thinking about this melody, I was like, oh, I'll do it again. I'll do the exact same thing, the same ending. I'll do the E flat, D, B natural, then C, D, C, A, like this. That was my first thought, and then I said, you know, I'm going to the new cadence. I want to keep this 16th note idea started, so why don't I just keep it going? Let me go up the scale and then catch it, and then I'm going to outline something different. So here I said, okay, I'm a 1 chord. This is going to be a 5 chord. I want to delay my resolution to my 1 chord to here. So what can I go to other than 1 here? How about a deceptive resolution to 6, which is why you're seeing this F sharp there in part, because I'm implying G minor, and then this, of course, being 5, and I'm just leaping within that triad, within the triad, the 5, and it doesn't even need to be 5/7. It can just be a plain 5 chord. This, however, definitely should be implying a 5/7 chord, because you got at least, it doesn't have to, but I have an E flat in there. It does make it a little bit more expected. So that was my thought processes, and that was my step-by-step process. So I'm going to play for you the melody just as is, and then I'll play it with the chords, so you can kind of hear what I came up with, and you can see that step-by-step process that I used. So here we go, just the melody. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you have a 12 bar melody based obviously on those 2 measures that were given as in elaborating on them, expanding them. Let's hear what it sounds like with the chords. Sorry. I'm sorry. All right. You're still not done. You might feel like that's the big stuff. Do not forget, when the directions ask you to indicate performance directions, they want you to be adding the articulation, so slurs. They want you to be putting in dynamics. Do not forget crescendo, decrescendo, whether there might be a staccato. Like, there were no staccatos in what was originally written here, but there's definitely some slurs to indicate that where the oboe player should be tonguing, using their tongue, and where they should just be using the air. You will need to do that. They will definitely take off points if this is an exam and you don't do that. And if this is a composition and you want live performers to, real people to play it, they're going to be like, why does this person not indicate? Do they really want everything tongued? Do they really want, as a composer, it's going to be expected that you've given thought to the way that it's going to be performed. Slurred or tongued, legato, staccato, loud, soft. So I'm not going to write that part in. I'm going to leave that to you because I think that's something that is a little bit easier to figure out. You kind of follow the patterns that were already introduced. So with that, folks, I hope that answers the question about enclosures, and you can see how I use them throughout this, as well as giving a step-by-step process on how you can finish a melody from a given part. So let me turn to the chat. Alrighty. So I talked about enclosures. I hope that helped you, Danny. Let me see here. Dr. B, thank you for all you teach in these classes. Learned so much. Hey, thank you very much. That's exactly what I love to hear. Well, I want people learning. Makes me very happy. Here's another question. Just wanted to ask that it is a appoggiatura, a non-chord tone, or a grace note. Oh, that's a good question. So the question could be like, what's the difference between an appoggiatura and a grace note? So here is the in part. So for it to be a grace note, it actually doesn't take, grace notes don't count for like the number of beats in a measure. So for it to be a grace note, let me see how can I explain that. So this is definitely part of the rhythm. It's a 16th note. That's a defined amount of time. For grace notes, it would be written like this. Let me show you how it would be written if it were a grace note. It would be written where eighth note, quarter note, that's the appropriate numbers, and then they would do this thing and they put a little double and a little hash through it, something like that, maybe 1 flag, 2 flags, put a little slash through it, and a grace note. But you see that doesn't add up to, that's more than, if you counted that, it's more than the 6/8 meter accounts for. And a grace note would actually be a little bit faster than the 16th note that I wrote. So that's kind of like the difference. And there's a little bit more levels in terms of talking about how grace notes work. But that's the fundamental difference, right? A grace note does not count towards the number of beats in a measure. It tends to be faster than a 16th note, but it depends on what's around it. And whereas the actual appoggiatura. Now, you can talk about grace notes and say, well, that still creates an appoggiatura shape, and that would be correct. So sometimes they can be both. It can be a grace note and an appoggiatura. In this case, it was a rhythmic 16th note that happened to be appoggiatura. If I wrote it like that as a grace note, you could say, well, that grace note functions like an appoggiatura. All right, here's another question. Could you talk about when to use non-chord tones? I was using one non-chord tone for a chord in my 4-part compositions, but I was analyzing some of Bach's chorales, and he's economical in his use of non-chord tones. I get the feeling that maybe I'm overdoing it. That's an interesting question, right? It's like you kind of want to understand like the ratios of how many non-chord tones to chord tones. Now Bach sometimes does use a lot of non-chord tones, like almost every other note sometimes, especially in the bass line. So Bach in his bass lines will often have like a scale where it's like chord tone, passing tone, chord tone, passing tone, chord tone, passing tone, appoggiatura, chord tone. And you might have something like that in a Bach example. But upper voices, especially melody, is going to have a larger number of chord tones. So let's analyze what I wrote here and see. Because this one has actually a pretty high number of non-chord tones. Non-chord tone, non-chord tone, chord tone, non-chord tone, non-chord tone, chord tone, non, chord tone, non, chord tone, non-chord tone, chord, non, chord. So if we just look at that initial part, we're looking at, more than 50% of the notes are chord tones, but that's still a pretty high number of non-chord tones. It's a pretty high percentage. Less than half, but substantial. I think the best way to kind of figure out if you're overdoing it is to, one, listen to it and compare it to how Bach sounds. This is where I've talked about listening to great music by great composers gets your ear oriented to understand like what's the level. It's like I kind of make an analogy to the Olympics. If I hadn't watched the Olympics, I would assume that what's possible for the long jump based on what I see, what I can do, what my friends can do, what I see in gym class. And I might think, oh, that's what's possible. There's, Jimmy, he's really good at long jump, and he, and then you see the Olympics, and very often people's reactions are like, I did not know that that was humanly possible, but that is a human, and they just did it. The standard of what's possible, your mind is opened up. And sometimes even knowing that they're human, you're like, how's that possible? Are they on drugs? Are they using like tons of performance enhancing drugs? And some of them are, but most of them are not. There's testing. And there are athletes who are, it's just the amazing amount of the momentum by training the right way over weeks, months, years. You develop things that those of us who aren't doing that don't even realize is possible. And in music, by listening to great composers, you can hear what's possible. And so I think when you're trying to figure out, am I overdoing how many non-chord tones I'm using? Use your ear, listen to the great composers, then use your ear. I would say as a rule of thumb, you definitely want to have at least 60% of every measure be chord tones. And it's also important where they fall. If you notice here on what I did, the non-chord tones are always on the weak beats. They're all on the weak beats. None of them are on the strong beats. And that's why I can use so many and it still sounds like good music, because when you get to the downbeat, you got that chord tone. Now that's not to say you can't have non-chord tones on strong beats. You can. Suspension, retardation, appoggiatura normally is on that. Even passing tones and neighbor tones can be on the strong beat, but it disrupts things a little bit more, so it's easier to overuse non-chord tones if you're putting them on the beat versus if you're using them off the beat on a weak beat. So I hope that helps a little bit, and so good luck with that. All right, we got someone who really hates the term motive used by Americans when it refers to a group of notes. In England, in the whole of Europe, we call it a motif, a piece of design. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Motif versus motive. What can I say? Americans tend to be kind of like, we're going to do it differently. You got monarchies, we're doing something different. So yeah, it's kind of silly. I think, as long as we can all understand each other, the important part is writing great music and having people hear great music. And so, yes, motif is definitely what you're going to hear. And it is funny, right? Because we're like, in America, we are using Italian words for tempo still most of the time. Not all the time. You look at the music of Aaron Copland or Charles Ives, and sometimes they're putting in, or Leonard Bernstein, they're putting in slow or fast or freely. It's kind of weird how we choose to use some foreign language terms and some specifically American terms, not even English, right? Because UK versus America, it's part of that linguistic thing. It's kind of funny how things develop. So yeah, I can understand how that would be really bizarre. Okay, so we had that transmission problem that got fixed up. Okay, so I have not looked into negative harmony yet. I apologize. It's on my list. I promise it hasn't been forgotten. I just, again, have not had enough time to really delve deep enough to have something as comprehensive as what I'm doing here. So bear with me. That's not forgotten. Is there a schedule for these classes so that I could tune in next time? Yes, it's a very tentative, loose. It's Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So United States, 3 p.m. Eastern time, every other week. Not every week, but every 2 weeks is when I'm planning to do it. I do often will post up in the Facebook fan page if there's any changes, so I'll give a heads up. Danny's really good about keeping people posted. I post in my Patreon group. So there's ways to find out if it's been changed, but the general schedule is going to be every other Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, I hope you're able to tune in right from the beginning next time. Someone says they love my work, never apologize. Well, I thank you. I don't apologize for my work. I do apologize when I make a mistake because I'm always trying to be better. I don't think that's what you meant by that. Someone says, great class, thank you very much. Next question, can you do a harmonic analysis of the second movement of Beethoven's 7th Symphony? Woo! Now you're asking for the big stuff. Okay, so this is one of those ones that has to go in the prepare for next time. That's obviously that's a big thing. I could prepare that. I'll add it to my list because this is a Beethoven year. What is this? A big centennial type of year. So there's a lot of Beethoven music going on. Beethoven's 7th Symphony, masterwork. So I'm going to make a note to myself. Beethoven 7th, and you wanted the second movement, is that what it was? I'm going to look closely here. Yeah. All right. Let me see what I can do. I'm not promising the very next one, but it's on the list of things for me to take a look at. Great question. Love Beethoven. All right. Dr. B, you've made Theory 1 a breeze this semester, but I do miss your class. Ah, yes, that was one of my former students tuning in. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. I guess you must be in Theory 1 when you transferred. All right. Frame keeps, oh, that's strange. I guess there's a problem with the frame still freezing. Guys, I really apologize. I will, you know, there's nothing I can do at this point. But I will, you know, the problem is I had to, with all this stuff, I couldn't do this from my home studio. I needed more board space. I'm just going to have to be a little less expansive. And I'm going to go ahead and look at my camera just to see if there's anything I can press that gets it back in running. Let's see if this does it. So I think I know what happened with that. Let me just take a quick